You don't learn your first language in school. By the time children start the first grade, they can obviously already speak pretty well at that, but also like not 100%, which is weird. So let me ask you a question. Let's say this is a man who knows how to gling. He's glinging. He did the same thing yesterday. Quick, what did he do yesterday? No, really, leave me a comment down below. If you're a native English speaker, chances are you said he glang, and a likely second is he glinged. But you've probably never heard this word since it was made up by Berko in 1958 for an experiment to test children's acquisition of English morphology. And it's not 100% clear exactly what it means. And when I said chances are, I mean 3-to-1 odds in favor of glang. But here's what's really interesting about this classic study. Children were great at telling you the plural of made-up words like wug, obviously wugs. But only 1 in 86 said glang, and 2 said glanged. So what's going on here? And why are linguists obsessed with these words? And why was there recently a massive amount of litigation and hurt feelings over wugs and cages and men who gling, spow, and rick? No, those weren't the lawyers. Have you or a loved one been caged? Have you been exposed to gutches in the workplace? You may be entitled to compensation. Call Gling, Spow, and Rick today. Gling, Spow, and Rick. Anyway, I'm Dr. Taylor Jones, and this is Language Jones. Now, there are two of them. There are two. Linguists love wugs. In part, that's because they're cute, and in part because they tell us something about language acquisition. If you ask an adult how to form a plural, they'll say, add an S. There are 3 different ways this S can be pronounced, and most adults won't think to list them. Cats, dogs, and houses. A careful thinker might point out that there are irregular plurals, mice, geese, and zero plurals, moose. But you didn't always know this. And Berko's 1958 study tried to get at what exactly preschool children and first graders knew and didn't know about English morphology compared to adults. She looked at verbs, plurals, and possessives, as well as compound words like airplane, Thanksgiving, and fireplace. The thing is, there's no reason why adding an S should be what makes a plural. After all, it's not in other languages. An Arabic-speaking child is just as likely to say that there's one wug and now there are two awayig. A Hebrew-speaking child is likely to posit wugim. But this is a feat in and of itself. These rules are arbitrary. And there's no a priori reason why the plural shouldn't be the word backwards, like goo. Children learn the morphological rules of their speech community's language, but they don't learn it all at the same time or at the same rate. Berko's study is the first well-known study that investigated this. It's worth quoting at length. In this experiment, preschool and first grade children ranging from 4 to 7 years in age were presented with a number of nonsense words. Did I mention they were nonsense? And asked to supply English plurals, verb tenses, possessives, derivations, and compounds of those words. Our first and most general question had been, do children possess morphological rules? A previous study of the actual vocabulary of first graders showed that they know real items representing basic English morphological processes. Asking questions about real words, however, might be tapping a process no more abstract than rote memory. We could be sure that our nonsense words were new words to the child, and that if he supplied the right morphological item, he knew something more than just the individual words in his vocabulary. He had rules of extension that enabled him to deal with new words. So this is not just cutesy baby fun, but rather, it might tell us something important about human language. But there's also cutesy baby fun, which is why people love it so much. They ask questions like, plural, one bird-like animal, then two. This is a wug. Now there's another one. There are 2 of them. There are 2. Just a side note, this is my absolute favorite swag from a linguistics conference ever. It has, this is a mug on one side, and now there are 2 of them. Plural, one bird, then 2. This is a gutch. Now there's another one. There are 2 of them. There are 2. Past tense, man with a steaming pitcher on his head. This is a man who knows how to spow. He is spowing. He did the same thing yesterday. What did he do yesterday? Yesterday he, past tense, man swinging an object. This is a man who knows how to rick. He is ricking. He did the same thing yesterday. What did he do yesterday? Yesterday he, to be fair, this is a man who knows how to rick. Diminutive and compound or derived word. One animal, then a minuscule animal. This is a wug. This is a very tiny wug. What would you call a very tiny wug? By the way, I get this one wrong because I always say a wuggle or a wuggala, but that really getting it wrong? Or is that getting it really right? This wug lives in a house. What would you call a house that a wug lives in? They also asked about some control words like a bell that rings, yesterday it blank, and drinking from a glass, and now there are two blank. Berko states charmingly, quote, "It was moreover evident that a great number of these children thought they were being taught new English words. It was not uncommon for the child to repeat the nonsense word immediately upon hearing it and before being asked any questions. Often, for example, when the experimenter said, 'This is a gutch,' the child repeated, 'Gutch.' What they found is fascinating, but before we get into it, I want to address a weird controversy in linguistics in the last few years. Undergrad and graduate students, since basically at least the 1990s, fell in love with Berko's prompts, and the wug became a sort of informal mascot for linguists. Tons of student societies and student-run conferences used images of wugs. But some of us crossed a line. So this, one of my favorite mugs, is okay as it alludes to the study. And my video right now is for educational purposes and correctly attributes the creator of the wug. But a few linguists started selling merchandise and making money off of Berko's designs. Because she designed them for an academic study, they didn't see this as theft of intellectual property, which I could sort of get. But things came to a head recently when Berko worked with a publishing company to make a children's book. I think this is a brilliant idea, by the way. Parents can track their child's morphological development. It's fun, and if I'm understanding this correctly, it can also be used to gather linguistic data on a much larger scale, so it's pretty cool. So the publisher's lawyer, on behalf of Berko, and sometimes Jean Berko herself, asked people to stop making money for themselves off of her idea, and in some cases issued a cease and desist. Some linguists, including some moderately well-known on Twitter and some who've published books for the general public, were very unhappy. I'm not sure if they were ever making a lot of money from their merchandise with stolen wug designs. I have the impression it was just that they didn't like being asked to stop. Although some dressed it in Marxist language, which is hilarious because the whole problem was their capitalist petty bourgeois running dog behavior. They weren't seizing the means of production for the proletariat. They were intellectuals whose only foray into producing a physical product was to use a third-party middleman to exploit underpaid factory workers to sell merchandise with a stolen idea on it. In essence, what I believe in their terminology might be called doing a late capitalism. Anyway, now's as good a time as any. Link to my merch in description below. In case you haven't guessed, as someone who occasionally writes music, makes original designs, and also did a thing that could make a pretty good children's book while writing my dissertation, there are dozens of us, I'm pretty firmly Team Berko here. She fucking knows how to riz. Okay, so back to the study. Because it's not just famous because it's cute and fun, and until recently, eminently stealable. Her findings were really interesting. Every child interviewed understood what was being asked of him. If knowledge of English consisted of no more than storing up of many memorized words, the child might be expected to refuse to answer our questions on the grounds that he had never before heard of a wug, for instance, and could not possibly give us the plural form since no one had ever told him what it was. This was decidedly not the case. Children answered the questions. In some instances, they pronounced the inflectional endings they had added with exaggerated care, so that it was obvious that they understood the problem and wanted no mistake about their solution. Sometimes they said, that's a hard one, and pondered a while before answering, which is super cute, or answered with one form and then corrected themselves. The answers were not always right so far as English is concerned, but they were consistent and orderly answers, and they demonstrated that there can be no doubt that children in this age range operate with clearly delimited morphological rules. This is huge. In 1958, it was not entirely clear that kids don't just learn language by memorizing everything they've ever heard. And there were very serious proponents of exactly that idea. Now, there are serious criticisms of Berko's paper, but they're based on arguing for generalizing based on exemplars, still not rote memorization. Oh, she also found that boys and girls did equally well. What I find interesting is that there were differences between preschool and first grade. And it wasn't a question of not having a morphological rule and then suddenly having one, but rather it was gradient. All the data in her papers looks like this. So I did what I usually do reading papers and I made my own quick and dirty graphs. It's worth just stating as an aside that you should always do this. And more often than not, you may find people's results aren't exactly what they're claiming when you actually graph their tables. Anyway, look at these. There's all sorts of gems, like them pointing out that kids correctly add a plural to cash based on understanding sound rules, despite that j sound being infrequent in English. I should add that the adjectival clipping cash was not yet widely used, if at all. Leave me a comment on this video, by the way, if you want another video on what's going on with totes, adorbs, trunks like cash. I'm something of an expert on that, actually. In fact, along with Lawrence Bradlin, I might be one of two of the world's experts on that. Anyway, my favorite part might just be her discussion of the compound words. That's afternoon, handkerchief, airplane, holiday, birthday, merry-go-round, breakfast, newspaper, blackboard, sunshine, fireplace, Thanksgiving, football, Friday. Insert Manchurian Candidate joke here. 17, daybreak, homecoming, freight car. Anyway, she asked kids to explain them. The children's explanations fall roughly into 4 categories. The first is identity. A blackboard is called a blackboard because it's a blackboard, which, like, flawless logic, kids. The second is a statement of the object's salient function or feature. A blackboard is called a blackboard because you write on it. In the third type of explanation, the salient feature happens to coincide with part of the name. A blackboard is called a blackboard because it is black. A merry-go-round is called a merry-go-round because it goes round and round. Finally, there's the etymological explanation given by adults. It takes into account both parts of the word, and it's not necessarily connected with some salient or functional feature. Thanksgiving is called Thanksgiving because the pilgrims gave thanks. Of the children's answers, only 13% could be considered etymological. 13%! Most of their answers fell into the salient feature category, while the number of identity responses dropped from the younger to the older group. She goes on to say, as we might expect, the greatest number of etymological responses, 23%, was given for Thanksgiving, which is an item that children are explicitly taught. It must be noted, however, that despite this teaching, for 67% of the children answering this item, Thanksgiving is called Thanksgiving because you eat lots of turkey. The salient feature answers at first seem to have the nature of an etymological explanation in those instances where the feature coincides with part of the name. 72% of the answers, for instance, said that a fireplace is called a fireplace because you put fire in it. When the salient feature does not coincide with part of the name, however, the etymological aspects also drop out. For birthday, where to the child neither the fact that it is a day nor that it is tied to one's birth is important, the number of functional answers rises. It's called birthday because you get presents or eat cake. Only 2% said anything about it being a day. Although the number of etymological explanations offered by the children was not great, it was clear that many children have what amounts to private meanings for many compound words. These meanings may be unrelated to the word's history and unshared by other speakers. Examples of this can be seen in the following. An airplane is called an airplane because it's a plane thing that goes in the air. Breakfast is called breakfast because you have to eat it fast when you rush to school. Thanksgiving is called that because people give things to one another. Thanksgiving? Friday is the day when you have fried fish. A handkerchief is the thing you hold in your hand and you go kerchoo. These examples suffice to give the general nature of the private meanings children may have about the words in their vocabulary. This is the best part. Wait for this. What is of additional interest is that the last explanation about the handkerchief was also offered by one of the college graduate adult subjects. Kerchoo. By the way, kerchief is from French couvre-chef or coverhead. It's a hand coverhead. She continues, we must all learn to handle English inflection and some of the patterns for derivation and compounding. So long as we use a compound word correctly, we can assign any meaning we like to its constituent elements. Anyway, it's a really fun paper, and I strongly encourage anyone who's even remotely interested to read it. And if you want authorized WUG merch, you can visit wugstore.com. That's real. As some of the linguists involved in the legal fight put it afterwards, regardless of the copyright status of the original 1958 or 2006 WUG images, drawing your own WUG images or creating a replica of the concept of the 1958 WUG in another format, such as on a cake or a tattoo. Did I mention people were getting tattoos of WUGs? Is permitted by US copyright law. The doctrine of fair use. This goes on for a while. Bottom line, they actually made a high-quality image that can be shared, available, and gave some serious warnings about what constitutes fair use. I can't fault them, since it appears to be their first foray into this. Meanwhile, jazz musicians are intimately familiar with the ins and outs of copyright. It's why there's a million songs over the chord changes to I Got Rhythm. So I was inspired and I couldn't resist. For a limited time, I've got merchandise that's inspired by the controversy, but that does not depict a WUG. This is not a WUG. Now, there are 2 of them, but there are no Any legal questions are already answered right on the design. Thanks to my patrons. Please like and subscribe. I'm trying to make it to 30,000 subscribers. And if you liked this video, you'll probably like this one. Until next time, happy ricking, try not to naz anyone, and may you all riz as much as you want.